Okay, and onward we move. We have completed number 3, or 96C, and we're on to 96D. And we've been looking at the symbol of the 5-pointed star with a triangle in the center, and the different levels, levels of consciousness, which this symbol can indicate. The initiate of a certain degree. And I was suggesting mainly either the 3rd or the 5th degree, but there are some other suggestions in there as well in the previous program. Right. So we're on page 320. We come now to a consideration of the rulers of this sign and to a study of the planets which act as focal points and as distributing agents for certain cosmic energies. The constellations of the zodiac are cosmic energies, and the planets act as distributors. What are cosmic beings? Well, the planetary logoi are considered cosmic beings, as is the solar logos and greater logoi even yet. Okay, much has been earlier indicated along this line, he says, and a true understanding of the nature of these impacting energies can only be grasped as we continue with our studies and investigate these signs in the relation which they assume as we study them in connection with other signs claiming the same planetary rulers. So when the same planetary rulers are related to various signs, we understand more about the signs which they rule in relation to each other. That is, the signs or constellations in relation to each other. So a true understanding of the nature of these zodiacal impacting energies can only be grasped as we continue our studies and investigate these signs in the relation which they assume as we study them in connection with other signs claiming the same planetary rulers. For instance, we would study Venus and the way that, let us say, Taurus, Gemini, Libra, and Capricorn are related through their connection with Venus. Or we would study Jupiter and the ways that let's see, Virgo, Sagittarius, Aquarius, and Pisces are interrelated because of their connection with Jupiter. So this is one of the newer methods of understanding astrology because of the alternative rulerships given, or the deeper connections given between certain planets and certain signs. We can begin to relate the signs. Previously we could only relate in relation to Jupiter, Sagittarius, and Pisces, but now we can as well relate Virgo, for which Jupiter is the hierarchical ruler, and Aquarius, for which Jupiter is the esoteric ruler, and they will all tell their story when we assemble these various signs. There is one point which I would like to make clear, and that is that in the two rulers of this sign, the Moon and Neptune, you have the symbols of a close relationship between the mother of all forms, which is, of course, the Moon, right? Moon. and the god of the waters, which is Neptune, and not always a very gentle god at that. Neptune is sometimes in mythology pictured as quite a dynamic, forceful figure, capable of whipping up the waters into, hurricanes, typhoons, or at least the effect that those winds have upon the ocean. That is between the two planets. So you have the moon and Neptune. They both suggest the watery element, but Neptune also has the solar fiery element connected with it. In this esoteric marriage, you have pictured for humanity a major synthesis of form and desire sensitivity. These are two very good descriptors of the planets involved: the moon, form, and Neptune, desire sensitivity. And consequently, a true statement of the stage of consciousness we call Atlantean. Now, you might wonder then, to what extent were the signs connected with these two important in Atlantean times? Let's just say that Cancer and Virgo, well, we have the moon and Neptune involved in both of them. They must have been very important in the reflected matriarchates of that period. We might also look for Aquarius, but that comes at a later stage of development. Aquarius also has moon and Neptune veiled by the moon. But this indicates a still higher phase of development, and probably is not much to be understood before the Aryan phase of consciousness. There is much of this today, and of this stage, mass sensitivity and mass identification with form and with forms is the significant indication and the outstanding characteristic of Cancer and its subjects. So we have here the widespread ignorance of mass consciousness. That is what we have. We continue here. Right. The moon, however, relates Cancer to two other signs, is what we've been saying, and these form a cosmic triangle: Cancer, Virgo, and Aquarius. In this combination, you have the sign of mass consciousness. This is Cancer, the sign of the Christ consciousness, and the sign of universal consciousness, very closely related to each other, and all of them through the medium of the influence of Neptune, which the moon veils. We can ask, even in Cancer, does the moon veil Neptune in the first stage of Cancer? It certainly veils Neptune in one of the stages of Virgo, because it's not only Vulcan that is veiled by the moon in the esoteric position, it is Neptune, and in the hierarchical position the moon is veiling Neptune, but yes, also Vulcan and Uranus. So, we can say in a way the moon veils one planet in Cancer if the moon veils Neptune. The moon veils two planets in Virgo and three planets in Aquarius. So from mass consciousness, which is in a way non-individualized, even though the participants in it have been individualized, from mass consciousness to the Christ consciousness, which is conscious of interrelation and unity to the universal consciousness, which is planetary in its scope, or better, solar systemic in its scope. It may hint towards wider states of universality, which involve the greater cosmos, but those are only trends in consciousness, and such ring-past knots cannot yet be embraced by the human being. So like Leo, which is ruled in all its three expressions, orthodox, esoteric, and hierarchical, by the sun, though veiling two planets, Neptune and Uranus, Cancer is the only other sign which is ruled by only one planet. Though in orthodox astrology, the moon is substituted for Neptune, and that, what is that one planet? And this is interesting, you know, that planet is Neptune. Interestingly, we have a great second-ray entity, and Neptune is also a second-ray entity on its monadic level. So DK is saying that Cancer is ruled in all levels by Neptune, and not so much by the moon, and that the moon even veils Neptune in the orthodox position. This is the, TK is actually making this inference. The inference is that the moon veils Neptune even in the orthodox position. So the moon is substituted for Neptune orthodoxly, because the form nature, which is dominant in the longest stage, because it is the form nature, which is the moon, which is dominant in the longest stage of human unfoldment, just as esoterically, it is the feeling, sensitive nature which dominates the average man, even the average man. So the average man is still subject to Neptune. And it is with this stable tendency that the disciple has to wrestle. The unveiled Neptune releases many energies which the average form ruled by the moon cannot deal with. And so I think somewhere here DK tells us that it is fortunate that the moon, or the moon veils the influences of Neptune, meaning that all of these many and subtle influences of Neptune cannot reach really the consciousness and cannot make their way through the form, because they are prevented by the influences of the unredeemed lunar lords. So the moon is substituted for Neptune orthodoxly, because it is the form nature which is dominant in the longest stage of human unfoldment, even millions and millions of years, just as esoterically, it is the feeling sensitive nature which dominates the average man, who is somewhat Atlantean. Atlantean, no, that's not, excuse me. Atlantean in his form and consciousness. Okay. And it is with this stable tendency of the Sun and Neptune that the disciple has to wrestle, transmuting the lower aspects of Neptune into the higher, and the lower aspects of the Sun into the higher. And the way of this transmutation is indicated by the veiled planets in the case of the Sun, and also in the case of the Moon in relation to Virgo and Aquarius. When it comes to Cancer, The only planet there really, the only living planet is Neptune. In the mass mind, of which Cancer is the truest expression, we might almost say, in a way, Venus is the mind, and when it is in Cancer, it shows the sensitivity to the mass mind. What is this mass mind? It's, let's say, it's largely ruled by instinct and emotion, or desire, without much mentation. And here DK is saying, what I was discussing before. He's saying, it is fortunate that Neptune is veiled by the moon. It is a real process, after all. It's not just a symbolic process. There is a blocking going on, and the fullness of Neptune cannot reach the human being, especially the undeveloped human being. It is fortunate that Neptune is veiled by the moon, and that the form, still the unregenerate form, fails to register or step down, cannot do so, many of the impacts to which the true man is sensitive. I guess we're saying form could not take it, nor could the consciousness of the average man. Average humanity is not yet fully equipped to bear, to withstand the full range of these impacts, to handle them constructively or to transmute them and interpret them accurately. So basically, destruction and glamour would result. Destruction and glamour would result. If you cannot handle something constructively, it may be destructive. If you cannot transmute, they will work out in lower effects. And if you cannot interpret accurately, glamour and illusion will result. So destruction, lower stimulation, we already see that in the case of drug addiction, when too many of most often non-experienced energies are allowed in, lower astral energies and so forth. So it is fortunate because Neptune requires, the planet of desire sensitivity requires a great development and sensitivity on the part of the receiver in order to handle the energies released. We do have people often bewildered by hallucinations, fantasies, drug-induced visions, or visions induced from higher energies which are poorly interpreted. This is, the mystical consciousness in a way. We can say, did the mystical consciousness interpret the impacts of Neptune correctly? And maybe sometimes yes, but other times there were hallucinations and astral impressions which were out of control. Upon the path of discipleship and along the line of esoteric development, yes, upon the fixed cross, one of the major difficulties and great problems of the disciple is his extreme sensitivity to impacts from every side. Of course, Neptune, probably those who are affected by Neptune are the most sensitive, and this is the planet of desire sensitivity. Desire sensitivity, idealism. This is the planet which wears away or dissolves the protective barriers and makes one vulnerable to all kinds of impacts which otherwise would be deflected by the insensitivity of the form or whatever vehicle might be impacted. Sometimes insensitivity preserves the present integrity of consciousness. It can't go on forever, obviously, but the way in which insensitivity is reduced and sensitivity encouraged should be in control and measured, and not sudden, because the individual will be engulfed, using kind of a term which relates to the ocean and to Neptune, engulfed by impacts which cannot be processed. So one of the great difficulties of the disciple is his extreme sensitivity to impacts from every side, and his rapid ability to respond to contacts coming from all points. Okay, I want to just get this somehow. Coming from all points of the compass, from every angle of the zodiacal wheel, and from that which is within, as well as from that which is without, from that which lies above as well as that which lies below. So this is the, what can we call it, omnidirectional sensitivity of the Neptunian subject, and how to handle and process the different energies and forces coming from the entire sphere of consciousness. So this is one of the problems of the disciple becoming ever more sensitive, how to respond to these impressions in a way that does not disorganize the integrity of consciousness, or if it changes consciousness, at least it does not do so in such a way as to shatter the consciousness. It is also as difficult and hard for the average student of modern times to grasp the mass consciousness of Cancer as it is for him to grasp the group awareness or the universal consciousness of Aquarius. Well, hopefully as disciples we're moving closer to this type of grasp, but we are in a way in the Leo phase between Cancer, Leo, and Aquarius, or with Leo at that center, the individual consciousness. It's hard to go back to being compelled by this force and that force. Under Saturn, we learn to stand regardless of what forces may be impinging upon us. In Leo, we also become the self-directing, self-aware, self-impressing agent, and we are somewhat impervious to conditional or conditioning impulses from without. We are self-controlled, self-directed. We move from our center and not from impulsions coming from without, but in the mass consciousness, there are just these waves of Kamamanas, desire-tinged thought that can move the individuals concerned, and all in the same way. They are swept by these influences. That stabilizes in Leo, and finally we have a point of stability in Aquarius, even though the range of contacts is much larger. So we're talking about the consciousness of Aquarius, and to this final development, humanity is hierarchically related by the moon veiling Neptune, but not only Neptune. He doesn't, talk only of Neptune, but elsewhere we learn that Vulcan and Uranus are also veiled by the moon, giving us the veiling of all three aspects of the personality and the possibility of transfiguring all aspects of the personality through the right assimilation of the impacting energies. When we begin to piece all this together, at first we learn in Virgo that the moon veils Vulcan, but then later we learn that it also veils Neptune. We learn that the moon veils Uranus and Aquarius, but then different references tell us about Vulcan and also Neptune. It makes sense. One veil in Cancer, Neptune. Two veils in Virgo, Vulcan, Neptune. Three veils in Aquarius, Vulcan, Neptune, and Uranus. The average human being is just beginning to grasp the stage of the individual Christ consciousness of Virgo, to which he is related by the same planet. So that's an important statement. Neptune and the individual Christ consciousness. The unveiled Neptune relates Cancer to no other constellation or sign, maybe a little bit of Pisces in another sense, with humanity responding to Pisces, humanity as a whole responding to Pisces through Neptune, as DK tells us that Alan Leo intuited. Um, and this is a fact of very great importance. Well, there's a lot of isolation in both Cancer and Leo, but later a great power of identification. The whole is seen as one in Cancer, and I am that, and that I am in Leo. So there's the taking over of the whole in both of these signs, even though they can at first be express through kind of splendid isolation in Leo, and simply through self-protective isolation in Cancer. So no other constellation or sign is being connected by the unveiled Neptune of Cancer, except, as I mentioned, Pisces, but that's the Neptune there is in another category. And this is a fact of very great importance. This fact is of very great importance because it indicates the fact that when a man is an initiate, he does not react to ordinary feeling, sentiment, which is kama-manasic. It's the blending of sentiency and mentality. Let's look at this. The blending of sentiency and mentality. It's kama-manasic. Or to personality relations, as they express themselves in pleasure or pain. Pleasure or pain to the personality. No, the initiate does not react to those emotional and kama-manasic states and those isolated personal states. All these are surmounted, and eventually the watery life of emotional reaction is superseded by the true life of true and of inclusive love. But both are connected with Neptune, aren't they? Because one is emotional and the other is Buddhic. Soul control, whether from the higher mental plane or from the triadal levels where the true ego is found, soul control esoterically obliterates the moon. All traces of Neptunian life. Well, let's call it lower Neptunian life, because higher Neptunian life is Buddhic and also monadic, and even leads to the cosmic astral plane. But at least lower Neptunian life. This is the control by the sun, in a way. The sun is the symbol of the soul. The sun as the symbol of luminous consciousness. Soul control esoterically. Notice esoterically, because the form is not obliterated, and the sentiency of the astral body is not obliterated, but is used. So soul control esoterically. Always watch his qualifiers, because there we see the wider field of knowledge which he may be obliquely referencing. Soul control esoterically obliterates the moon and all traces of Neptunian life. The initiate is no longer ruled by the mother of the forms, the moon, or by the god of the waters, the astral waters. When the waters break and are carried away, the mother gives birth to the sun, and that individual spiritual entity then stands free. So we're talking about the birth of the Christ consciousness, which cannot take place in the overly emotional human being. So the emotion must give way to love. And all of the initiation process is the adding of buddhi to the consciousness, however gradually that may occur. The adding of buddhi to consciousness progressively at the various initiations. Each initiation involves the addition of buddhic energy to the personality consciousness, gradually rendering it the instrument of the soul. Excuse me. the soul is largely the conveyor of buddhi because it is connected with the second aspect. So I would ask you to ponder on this point. He asks us to ponder on this point, and we realize that in the normal mass consciousness, which is emotional and camomonastic at best, and which is instinctual in terms of the drives of the body and so forth, the Christ consciousness cannot emerge. These two, the moon and Neptune, are therefore the direct influences which are brought to bear upon the Cancer subject. The subject is subjected to the influences of a particular sign. The Leo subject is subjected to Leo energies, the Cancer subject to Cancerian energies. The word subject then has an esoteric implication and shows one's relation to superior energies. We could say that Cancerian energy is brought to bear, but if it is brought to bear, it's brought to bear largely through Neptune, which is a transmitting deity in this case. As remote as it is, it's much closer to us, really, than the sign Cancer per se. But all of these influences are really, in a sense, right here because they are influencing our genetics and our form, our appearance, the tendencies of our body. All of that can easily be seen to the observant individual, by the observant individual. So these are direct influences, although it's hard to think of the moon as the direct influence unless it's simply a repetitive, rhythmic influence generated in the past, which has some degree of perpetuation in the present. Really, Neptune is the influence. But the moon is the habit nature, and in a way it preserves some response patterns that come from earlier times, hence its connection with instinctuality. Okay. Therefore, the direct influences which are brought to bear upon the Cancer subject, and this leads to the unfoldment of the form life and of the emotional astral body. Well, you know, in a sense, the first two petals of the egoic lotus. The first two petals of the egoic lotus. Modern man even has some unfoldment of the third petal. So that would make him intelligent man as well as instinctual and emotional. But the Atlantean consciousness is largely instinctual and emotional, and we are told that although the Atlanteans accomplished great things, in the mass they did not, because they were simply sensitive reflectors of higher impressions, and they were guided by the guides of the race. They were receptive registrants, mirrors of the intentions of those more intelligent beings. The average Atlantean could carry out many things, but not because he could originate them himself. He was guided by emotion and by the life of his form, instinctually prompting him. The supreme usefulness of these aspects of the form and the emotion will be grasped by you if you will intelligently realize that without the form and without the ability to bear in mind the need to respond sensitively to the environing conditions and circumstance, the soul would never awaken to knowledge in the three worlds and would therefore never know God in manifestation. Well, the soul knows God on the mental plane and above, but to awaken to God in man manifestation, the form and sensitivity are needed. So we would be the buried soul in incarnation without progressing form and without sensitivity. Sensitivity awakens us to pain, which awakens us to those types of activities which would drive us deeper into matter, and those types of activities which will liberate us from matter form. So it is through sensitivity within the form and pain and pleasure experience within the form that we awaken to the possibility of rising out of the form and also expressing soul through the form. We can say that pain is the great awakener, hence the value of the fourth ray, which incidentally you can say is connected to the moon. We're told that there is a undiscovered planet veiled by the moon, which is probably a fourth ray planet, and Neptune has much to do with the Buddhic plane, with intuition, and hence with the fourth ray. At least it is the indicator of a vibrational domain correlated to the fourth ray and to harmony, the Buddhic plane, the Buddhi as a principle. So the supreme usefulness of form and emotion, or sensitivity, sentiency, is to be understood, and the planetary god is building carefully, making sure that there is the foundation for the liberation of soul in form, but only once that form is truly known and experienced through pleasure and through pain. Indirectly and via the influences of the cardinal cross. See, there are direct influences in every sign and indirect. In a way, all subjects born in relation to the cardinal cross are affected by all the same energies, but some of them are direct and some of them are indirect. So contrast direct influences from indirect influences. Indirectly and via the influences of the cardinal cross, of which Cancer is a part, the Cancerian subject is affected by or influenced by 5 other planets, Mars, Mercury, and Uranus, all from Aries, right? Neptune, of course, from Cancer, and we've been discussing that. Venus from Libra, Saturn from Libra, and Uranus again from Libra, and Saturn and Venus from Capricorn. So only Neptune is a direct influence, and all the others are indirect and presumably less influential when they are indirect. Less influential when indirect. The Cancerian subject becomes responsive to the uses of conflict between the isolated units, leading eventually to relationship, to the functioning of the light of intuition, Mercury, tying him with the Buddhic plane, to which Cancer, characterized by the number 4, is necessarily related, and also related through Neptune, its ruler, to the cosmic pull of Uranus, coming through Aries and coming through Libra, and pulling towards the spiritual triad and the logoic plane as well, and to the higher spiritual hierarchies. But Uranus is the heavenly one, and it's interesting that he talks about cosmic pull because it, leading us beyond always. Uranus leading the subject beyond his usual domain, plus the intellect of Venus. Interesting that he calls Mercury intuition when we know it has a lot to do with intellect at certain levels of its expression. And Venus has to do with more than simply intellect, but it is the 5th ray nature of Venus that he is here pointing to. Plus the intellect of Venus and the presentation of opportunities, Saturn, he always puts the positive spin on this, because Saturn allows us to confront our bondage, our submission to negative forces, our obstacles. So that is opportunity. You know, we could go along for quite a while without ever having to confront these binding forces. But Saturn gives us the opportunity to confront those habits and tendencies which hold us subject to matter form. These, however, play subjectively upon the dweller in the form. Does that, well, okay. Does he mean that indirect influences play only subjectively? These, however, play subjectively upon the dweller in the form and are not consciously registered as potencies by the individual for many eons of time. Well, in other words, there are early cardinal cross experiences, our early Cancerian and, in general, cardinal cross experiences. And all of these potencies are playing upon the individual, no matter how benighted he may be, but for eons. And what is an eon here? You know, it's many cycles. Can an eon be a great Platonic age? It seems a bit short, doesn't it? Is an eon the circulation of our solar system, the revolution of our solar system around the star Alcyone and the Pleiades in general, if that actually takes place? Is that 250,000 years, roughly? Is that an eon? Right now, it's a generic unit of time, a long time. That much we understand. DK knows well what he means by eon here, and if you add up the eons, you get millions of years. And no doubt we were born in or under many of the cardinal signs in early days, and in Cancer many times, I suppose. And all of these influences, which are the rulers of the other arms of the cardinal cross, were playing upon the man subjectively, that is, unconsciously, but not registered. Now, many of us, let's say we're on the fixed cross, we should definitely be able to register the influences of the other signs. You know, on the fixed cross, we should be able to register Venus, Vulcan, Sun, Mars, Pluto, Mercury, Uranus, Jupiter, and the Moon. All of those we should be able to register. Some of them will be indirect. The majority will be indirect, and depending upon the sign in which we are born or under which we are born, we will have more direct influences. So in our own life, we need to discriminate between influences which are direct and those which are indirect. And not until the life of the form and the reaction to sensitive emotion feeling has played an active and an educational part in the awakening of the mind. So we cannot register these subjective potencies until we are very familiar with form life, and sensitive emotion feeling has educated us on a lower turn of the spiral to be sensitive on a higher turn of the spiral. Eventually, our many feelings, our many sensitivities call in the mind, so we can well understand and end the pain of the life of duality, of action and reaction, or of what can we call it, of sentient emotional, action and reaction. Once that awakening of desire and its transmutation into higher aspiration has taken place, then the Virgo influence comes in. Remember the 5 that we were dealing with. We had Cancer, Virgo, Scorpio, Capricorn, Pisces. So Virgo followed Cancer just the way it did in the previous solar system, being the sign, the constellational energy most powerful in the latter half of the earlier solar system, Cancer in the first part. So once that awakening of desire and its transmutation into higher aspiration has taken place, then the Virgo influence comes in, and the responsive soul, developed by the 5 indirect influences of the cardinal cross, begins its active, conscious participation in the drama of life. So the soul begins to respond. It is awakened through higher aspiration. The sense of soul presence and soul influence is awakened by higher aspiration. Whoops. Higher aspiration. Awakened by higher aspiration. The Virgo influence comes in, and how interesting that the soul influence is developed by the 5 indirect influences. Soul influence developed by 5 indirect influences. So all the time, the capacity to respond to something higher than the personal self is being, when one is born on or under the cardinal cross, being developed by the indirect influences of the cardinal cross. And then the soul can begin its active participation in the drama of life. You know, let's just say, hitherto it has been the personality. Now soul response can enter on the stage and play its part. Thus the direct and indirect influences of the 7 planets, 7 planets in this case of the cardinal cross, play their varied parts in man's unfoldment. He's already gone through that, you know, conflict and intuition and the trans movement, the transmutation, transformation, transfiguration, you know, the cosmic pole, the pole beyond of Uranus, and the intellect of Venus, and the presentation of opportunity of Saturn. He's already talked about these possibilities. How many planets are there on the cardinal cross? I guess he's also including Neptune. So we have Mars, Mercury, Uranus, and Neptune. Let's see if we're going to count the moon. We have Venus, we have Saturn. And I guess he's counting the moon. He talks about 7 planets. What have I left out? Moon, Neptune. So that's 5 when we consider Aries and Cancer. That's 5. And Venus and Saturn. Okay, that's 7. The moon is considered. Thus, the direct and indirect influences of the 7 planets of the cardinal cross play their varied parts in man's unfoldment. And we have to keep in mind what each planet can really do, and thereby understand how to interpret the strengthening of any particular planet in the life at any particular time. And students would find it of interest and value to relate the effects of these 7 planetary forces to the unfolding 7 principles of man. Well, you know, how should we do this? The Buddhi is Neptunian. Atma is Atma is in a way Saturnian. The higher Manus can be considered Uranian. Venus can be considered the soul or the intellect. There are different ways to arrange this. Mars can be considered astral, and the moon can be considered etheric, physical. Mercury, well, it is the mind, but it's also intuition. There's different ways to assign these things because the different planets have different connections with the different vehicles. But that's something we could work out. It's also possible to consider Uranus as Atmic and Saturn is related to the higher mind. They are, in some senses, interchangeable. Mercury could be related to Buddhi, in which case Neptune would be related to the astral. But I prefer to keep the higher planets, the synthesizing planets, related to the higher triadal principles of man. Certainly Venus is related to the soul, and maybe Mercury to the concrete mind in this particular case. Mars to the astral nature, and the moon to, well, or the physical nature, and the moon to the physical nature definitely, but sometimes to the astral nature. There are multiple assignments here. But let's just say on the rulers of the cardinal cross can be related to the 7 principles of man and their unfoldment. Beyond the 7 principles, these rulers also have assignments. But Saturn is definitely related to the spiritual will, no question about it, and to Atma, and the discoveries of higher mind to Uranus, but also beyond that. Neptune definitely to Buddhi, the Venus definitely to higher mind, Mercury in one of its types of expression to lower mind, Mars to the astral nature, but also to the levels of all the personal levels, including the physical body, and the moon of the 5 non-sacred planets is especially associated with the dense physical vehicle, in which case Mars is connected with the astral body, Pluto with the lower mental body, Pluto, so it's Earth with the etheric body, and the Sun with the entire integrated personality. This is quite a chapter, very inclusive. Let us now briefly consider for a few minutes the effect of the ray influences as they focus through the 7 planets upon the man born in the sign Cancer, and therefore subject to 6 of the 7, or to, well, at least to 5 of the 7 planets in an indirect manner. And I think now that we've reached a point where, yes, what we can do is we can call this the end of Esoteric Astrology Adventure 96, Part D, and we are on page 324. And I think our beginning of Esoteric Astrology Adventure 97, page 324. And let's have, at the end of this series, the Great Invocation. And yes, there it is. Good. Okay. And then we'll be able to put these together and get them off to you. Plenty to think about, plenty to correlate. I feel like I'm getting a little more warmed up now. You know, when I started on the Leo chapter, it had been 7 months. So there are sections of that I'd like to redo, but the important thing is this ongoing motion and the ongoing delivery of these thoughts to you so that you can use some of these things as seed ideas, working out what you think will be best in your own study of esoteric astrology. From the point of light within the mind of God, let light stream forth into the minds of men. Let light descend on earth. From the point of love within the heart of God, let love stream forth into the hearts of men. May Christ return to earth. From the center where the will of God is known, let purpose guide the little wills of men, the purpose which the masters know and serve. From the center which we call the race of men, let the plan of love and light work out, and may it seal the door where evil dwells. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth. Okay, friends, lots to think about, of course. I don't want to let this file get too big. We've had 4 hours of it, and if it gets too big, it might not convert. So we will go on and come back to this at our first opportunity, continuing on page 324, in the middle of the Cancerian chapter, the end of Esoteric Astrology Adventure number 97. Okay, so we will see you a little later, and hopefully this will be of value to you.